Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Alex M. Frankel. He's joining me all the way from the States, and it's 3 o'clock in the morning where Alex is. So, but you are a night owl, I
Yes,
understand. This isn't,
totally.
this isn't a concession just to speak to me. I'm three o'clock in the morning. I might be awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, trying to figure out how to get more listeners for my podcast or something like that. But yeah,
Yeah.
I would, preferably I'd be asleep at 3. Thank you for making time for us today, Alex. Looking forward
You're welcome.
to our conversation. So, as we were talking, Alex and I spoke a couple of months ago, and some things come up for Alex in those time, an insight that he's had. And so today, the title of today's podcast is Addicted to Love. And that isn't just a Robert Palmer song with some, with a fantastic video from the 80s. And we've come up with the title Addicted to Love, because that is a more kind of user-friendly way of introducing a concept, a thing that I hadn't heard of before Alex shared it with me, and that is limerence. So it's Limerence. It's limerence. So what's limerence, and why did you think that would be a great topic to explore, Alex?
I thought it would. It's a kind of pathological infatuation that results in a person having intrusive thoughts and addicted to rumination and the loss of sleep and the loss of weight. And the person basically every waking moment of his life or her life or their life is absorbed with the lover, with the so-called limerent object, the infatuated person. And I thought this would be a good topic because I recently had a brief bout of limerence myself in the last month, and I realized that limerence, also known as love addiction, sex and love addiction, or romance addiction. Limerence was what originally got me into therapy back in the mid 1980s, and therapy was what led me within just a few short years to find my biological parents.
Yeah. So, why do you think limerence is? Have you seen limerence as being widespread amongst us adoptees? Have you got a sense? Have you got a sense of that?
Well, the book that I read, it's actually the sort of the Bible of the concept from 1979. Dorothy Lenoff's book, Love and Limerence. Her book is now 40 years later, a little bit dated. So she talks about heterosexual couples a lot. She doesn't talk about gay couples very much. She does a little bit, but it's now over 40 years ago, and she has actually a very dim view of psychotherapy. So in some ways, the book is a little bit dated, and so I would be fascinated by anyone who has done a study of the connection between limerence and adoption, because I think it would be a fascinating topic. But since the concept of limerence is just getting known now, as in the last basically 10 years, I'm sure that the literature, whatever it is very limited. But I'm in her book, she does talk about the kind of people who are susceptible to pathological love, and I bet that people who are adoptees are probably more likely than the rest of the population to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen anything. It might have been studied. They could be talking about it in academic journals, but I suspect there is a connection, and I think it should be studied more. I think they should be writing books about it.
Yeah. Well, it kind of it seems a logical thing to me. Well, I'm not sure it's both logical and intuitively. It seems that it could be a driver.
Yes.
Why do you feel, or do you think it could? What's behind your kind of potential connection between these two things?
Well, basically, the very few weeks after I started therapy, I was living in Barcelona at that time in 1986, 1987. And my therapist was a psychoanalytic, kind of old school psychoanalytic psychotherapist from Argentina. We did it in English in Spain, so it was quite international. And during one of the very first sessions, after I talked so much about romantic rejection, she said to me, "But have you ever thought about the original rejection? Your biological mother, your natural mother." And I was very defensive when I heard that commentary, that insight, because I had been taught that you're supposed to view adoption as a very, very positive thing. Your adoptive parents are your parents, and the less thought you give to your biological parents, the better. So as soon as she came up with that insight, that all this stuff, because romantic rejection and these episodes of limerence, very, very intrusive thoughts, et cetera, ruminating, inability to sleep, inability to eat. Your whole life revolves around this infatuation, around this idealized object that you are putting on a pedestal. Well, she told me that that was what I was doing with my birth mother.
Wow. So
Yes.
in the phrase that's coming to my mind is lovesick.
Yes, yes, that is a synonym. Yes, that's one of the synonyms. That's one of the words that has been in circulation for a long time. Love sickness. And in my early 20s, I guess is natural. My early 20s, my mid 20s, I was more susceptible to that than any other time in life. It was still very much there in my 30s, and that even into my 40s, it was very, very strong still. And then by the time I reached 50, things started to change. I was not no longer dating. I no longer saw myself as desirable. So external factors sort of helped me get into that recovery from that. But it's like with alcoholism or food addiction, the disease is always lurking there. So it finds a way to creep out, even if you think that you're cured. Of course, nobody is cured from alcoholism. Nobody's cured from food addiction. And so the same thing with lovesickness. It's something that's always there. Dorothy Tenoff, I think I misspoke with her last name earlier. Dorothy Tenoff does not spend very much time in her book talking about living in the solution. She gives just a basic idea that you starve it to death, that the person that you're in a relationship with, who is obsessing you so much, or the person who is unrequited that you only know from a distance, they have a name for that. You employ the no contact rule. You might have heard that expression from different websites. They talk about this stuff, how to get over an ex. So you starve it with the no contact rule. It's like you swear off you swear off looking at pictures. Social media can be very, very dangerous, because nowadays everybody has tons of pictures on social media, and usually they're very nice pictures, otherwise they wouldn't be posting them. So you can get really trapped in a cycle, And so just intuitively, one of the things she suggests in her book is so-called no contact. So you are able to sort of through sort of starvation get over this. And now in the last, especially in the last 10 years, there are websites, whole websites, and Reddit, even Reddit groups. I think one group, one website is called Living with Limerence, and they go into much more detail about how to live more in the solution instead of sticking in the problem.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. As you describing it, I thought of one girl who I had on a pedestal like 30 odd years ago, who I obsessed over, and I'm also thinking when somebody did that to me, I pushed them away. So her and this happened to me both times. So when I had a girl called Vicky on the pedestal, she pushed me away, but she didn't actually push me away. She kind of sometimes let me in, and then sometimes she pushed me away, which drove me nuts.
Oh, yes.
I didn't know where I was, right?
Yes.
But then a couple of years later, a girl had me on the pedestal, and I actually finished it because I saw her view of me as better than my version of me.
Oh.
And I actually finished with her. I couldn't handle being almost like hero worshipped. I couldn't handle it. And
yes.
And I can also think, in my, between starting going out with girls and starting my relationship with my wife. So we had a 25th wedding anniversary yesterday, which is
congratulations.
Thank you. Before her, I was always trying to find somebody where the love level was at the same. So some girls I loved them more than they loved me, and some girls they loved me more than I loved them. And I was aware of a need to find a balance, really. And I guess that's what I found with my wife. The other thing that struck me is, sorry, before I go on, does that ring any? Can you say anything about? Does my example, does that prompt anything?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Well, having just read the book a couple of days ago, what you were describing in the first instance, the person sort of played sort of, not to be too negative, but was sort of playing games with you, because she left you breadcrumbs. She encouraged and then sometimes shut the door. And living in hope and uncertainty, that is a classic way the limerent lives. Because if things are shut down from the beginning, if they're nipped in the bud, so to speak, then the disease does not have a way to blossom. So you and all others living in this condition were getting the breadcrumbs, and you were living in hope and uncertainty. And that is what the limerent goes through. Exactly.
Yeah. The other phrase that came to my mind in terms of swearing it off is the phrase "cold turkey" came to mind.
Yes.
Yes. And I thought about, like, so we're a week after Thanksgiving here, or around 6 days since Thanksgiving. So in the UK, you have turkey for Thanksgiving. We have turkey. We don't have Thanksgiving, but we have turkey for Christmas Day, and we have turkey off like with bread sauce, right? So when you said breadcrumbs, I was thinking cold turkey and bread sauce. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Which is a strange one.
Yes.
Cold turkey, and I was thinking white knuckling it.
Yes.
White knuckling through, and I was thinking about another. I was thinking about perhaps the ultimate movie, Cold Turkey, was Gene Hackman in the in the French Connection.
Oh, I remember that movie, but I can't remember exactly his role and what
So
happened with that.
he's a cop, and the
Mm-hmm.
bad guys get him addicted to heroin.
Oh.
And he goes, I think he locks himself in a cell to go cold turkey or something. So he goes through
Mm.
he goes through cold turkey, and the sweats and all that stuff, and white knuckles it off. And the other thing that came into my mind, and I do refer to this a little bit on the podcast, is, well, for me, there's two ways out of an addiction. One is the white knuckling it,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and the other is an insight. And the example that it's not a love, it's not a limerence addiction, it's not a love addiction. But I read this book called High Risk by a guy called Ben, I think he's Ben Timberlake. And this guy decides he's an adrenaline junkie,
Mm-hmm.
and he becomes a junkie. So he decides to try heroin for 2 weeks to see what it's like coming off it. And
Mm.
5 years later, he comes off it.
Oh.
He comes off it. And he comes off it on the basis of an insight. And
Oh.
the audio book is 7 hours long or something like that. But the insight that gets him off heroin is one sentence in that book. And it's when he realizes that he is bigger than his addiction. So
Mm.
that the addiction is happening within him, and he is bigger than that. So instead of the addiction having him, he has the addiction. And yeah, does that
Yes.
it makes kind of perfect sense to me? But I
Yes.
haven't really explored it with other people.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So
I think insights. I should not be. Nobody should underestimate insights. And very briefly, I can give you an example.
right,
The last time I talked to you, we talked at the beginning of October. I was in San Francisco for a funeral. A close friend of mine had just passed away, the same age as me, and I was doing very very poorly. It was like it was like I had lost family. It was like I felt there's a hole in my torso, and it took me a few more days. And when I got home, when I got home to San Francisco, I realized. I mean, sorry, when I got home from San Francisco to LA, where I live, it took me about a week, and then suddenly I had an insight, and the insight that basically my friend who had just died, she and I had been in touch only in the last 15 years. She was a childhood friend, but we had not been in touch for most of our 20s, most of our 30s, and the first half of our 40s. So there was a 25-year gap in our friendship. And when my father died in November of 2007, um, it was the worst experience of my life, because again, a lot of adoptees have a great deal of difficulty when their adopted parents die. That's very very common, because of the loss that experienced early in life. They have it's even more traumatic to lose a parent for an adopted person. So I was, and also my father had given a lot of his wealth away to a gold digger. So I was in the worst possible situation. I was in tears. I was collapsing inside, and there were very few people at the funeral. It was a traditional little Jewish burial at the cemetery. And this friend of mine appeared for the first time in 25 years. We had lost touch. Tanya, she appeared, And I realized that a few days before, when I had talked to the cantor who officiated at the service, I was sitting in the cantor's house and the cantor's wife, and I thought to myself, I am in such bad shape that I wish the cantor would adopt me. I wish the cantor and his wife would adopt me. Here I am in my 40s, and I want them to adopt me because I'm so forlorn. And sure enough, a couple of days later, at that funeral, Tanya appeared out of nowhere. Of course, the cantor never adopted me. Nobody else ever adopted me. But Tanya immediately invited me to have dinner with her family a couple of days after the funeral. And she immediately included me in her life. And for the next few years, I was invited every Thanksgiving to her family. So she was the one who adopted me. Tanya was the one who adopted me, not the cancer, not all these other strangers. She was the one who adopted me. And that's why her loss was so horrific. And as soon as I had that insight, I felt even a little guilty about this. But as soon as I had that insight, I began to recover because I saw what I was doing. She had literally replaced family. She had stood in for family. So I can totally relate to the value of insights, even though the one I've just described is not directly related to romance, and it's not directly related to birth parents.
Yeah. So, wow, yeah, it's profound. And my best friend died 22 and a half years ago. And my reaction to that was, it seemed out of perspective, beyond perspective. I didn't judge it at the time.
Yeah.
We don't tend to judge our grief. I shouldn't be this upset.
Yes. Yes.
But looking back on it now, but there is one around. I don't know whether it was around that time or before that time or not. But yeah, one of my wife had two. My wife had a chinchilla, little rodent treat, pet, and he died. And I wasn't close to the chinchilla, but I seemed to react to it. The reaction seemed to be out of proportion, and as you say, like, my father died 5 years ago, and actually that seemed a lot. That wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. So maybe it's the kind of the inner work that I've done in the meantime. On the way back from the hospital, when we'd spoken with the surgeon, with the specialist, and he told us that the end was nigh for my dad. I remember pulling up at you call them stoplights, we call them traffic lights, right? Pulling up, I had to pull up. There's a red light, and a little voice said to me, "You can get through this, Simon."
Yes.
And it was an inner voice of wisdom. Now, the voice in my head is normally a critic. I don't have I don't have a lot of wisdom coming through like that. I don't have a lot of that voice of fortitude. I've never used the word fortitude, but that voice of fortitude, that's not a regular occurrence in my life. That's the voice in my head is normally, criticizing me, not encouraging me, not saying you got this, Simon. And I think that gave me incredible strength. I did lose it a few weeks later because communication within the hospital was appalling, and I was losing it until I had an insight which,
Mm.
and the insight was, Simon, you've got the drama of your father's imminent death going on for you here. You're also laying on your ego or your pain body or whatever you want. That you're adding another layer of frustration here with the nurses, the doctors and nurses in the hospital. You're doing that to yourself.
Mm.
Focus on your dad, not your
Yes.
frustration. Focus on your love for your
Yes.
dad, not your frustration with the hospital. And that came as an insight, and I
Yes.
remember that happening. And it happened in the middle of a rant. Actually, I was ranting
Oh.
somebody, and when and so I was hearing the words coming out, and then I thought, "Oops," you know.
Yes.
Um,
So a light sort of went off.
a light went off. Yeah, a light went off.
Yes. Yes.
Epiphany moment, and okay, stop doing this. Deal with the deal with the death, not the.
Yes.
So I'm wondering how much of our loss of our birth mothers gets transferred onto love addiction for others.
Yes. Yes. Well, I think there's a very, very strong connection. I'm sure that this has been written about extensively somewhere, even though they might not call it limerence. This has probably been written about. Certain things adoptees go through that others don't seem to go through. In my case, yeah, when I was told about my adoption around the age of 7, I suppressed the actual moment that I was told, but I didn't suppress the knowledge. I suppressed the moment, exact circumstances of how I was told, and that didn't come back until many years later. But from then on, I did know that I was adopted, and a lot of people who are adopted, I think they fantasize that their mothers were very poor, and their birth families were very poor and very reduced circumstances. So I always pictured her that way, very pale, very almost like I don't know, someone from a Victorian workhouse, something very, very
Yeah,
extreme.
Oliver. I mean, it's Oliver, isn't
Yes,
it?
yeah, yes, yes, yes,
Or it's Cinderella.
yes. From the moment that well, from the time that I first knew I was adopted until later, I always had the idealized version of my limerent object, my sexual and romantic ideal. Was a boy, was a young man who was very, very boy next door, very athletic, very pretty, very popular, and um, and that was all a similar kind of and maybe also very working class, and that was also the kind of image that I had of my birth mother. And it turned out that when I met her later in life, she was very much that way, except she was from a rich family. She was not from a poor family. She was from a very, very rich family, although the wealth disappeared, and by the time she was an adult, she was uh, very lower middle class. But her background was the first family in the town of Auburn in Northern California, and it's now a golf course. All these years later, it's now a huge golf course and a golf house. As far as the eye can see, that was their land, and she was a cheerleader. She was a very typical 1950s cheerleader. So in a way, the image that I had of her, uh, uh, the boy next door, was very connected to the cheerleader kind of person that she later turned out to be. But I also imagined that my birth mother would be very aloof and very cold. And that is exactly the way she turned out to be. She was aloof and cold. And most of the people that I've been attracted to have been aloof and cold and sending mixed messages, like we were talking about earlier. So being encouraging one moment and then pulling back another moment. There are a lot of strong connections.
Well, yeah, and the thing came to my mind is that people yeah, keep them, treat them mean, keep them keen. Is that?
Yes.
So
That's right.
we want what we can't have,
Yes.
and people use this. They use this against us, and also people, companies do this as well. I don't. So if you want, this is a silly example, but it's true. It's the same thing. I guess I'm pointing to a different story, and a different story to help people see that, hopefully to see it, to their own insight on that. So after my mum and dad sold one of their businesses in the mid-90s, he went into a Mercedes showroom. He'd seen this car, and he really loved the wheels, and it was a really posh Mercedes, top of the range kind of Mercedes with these fantastic wheels. He fell for the wheels, but the salesman asked him. It was in London, and he said, "Do you work for one of the embassies, sir?" And my dad went, "No, I've got a business. I've just sold a business up in Yorkshire." "Oh, this car is here for us to sell to embassy staff."
Oh.
So what the guy was doing, a role reversal. So instead of saying, "Do you want this car?" he was saying, "You can't have this car."
Oh.
So it's reversing. It's changing the power differential so that the seller has the power, not the buyer. And
Yes.
and what we can't have, we want. So in extreme forms, in extreme forms, if a brand new Ferrari comes out, like the top one, you can't have it unless you've had another one, and you have to be invited to do it. And when you buy it, you can't actually even have it. The Ferrari will store it for you, and they will take it around the world, transport it around the world, so to racetracks where you can enjoy the Ferrari with other people of your status. So it's the whole. It's like what we can't have makes us want it even more.
Yes.
And if we want, like, what's behind that want, what's behind our drive as adoptees. We want our mum back.
Yes.
Or we want our truth. We want to know. We want an end to the limerence for our birth mother.
Yes.
Or we transfer our limerence for our birth mother, our love for our birth mother, onto, and it becomes a limerence onto other people, and the mother-child bond gets transfigured. I don't know, transformed. it becomes
Mm-hmm.
a love thing. It becomes a romantic thing. It becomes a sexual thing, because we're looking to we're looking to become one, aren't we?
Yes.
We're looking for an absence of separation between us and the love object.
Yes. 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 That's very true. Uh, I couldn't agree more. Um, and I think that in the literature on limerence, they say, or at least in the book, Batenov's book, Love and Limerence, I think she says that sometimes it's a certain amount of limerence is normal. A certain amount in a reasonable degree is normal. Maybe even for both parties. But the ideal situation is that they get over their limerence, so to speak. They're let's say they're 3 years of being absolutely head over heels for each other, and they settle down to something that is not limerence, that is sort of a mutual a mutual love that is not uh, pathological, that is not obsessive. They settle down to what most people would consider, let's say, a normal, healthy relationship. But uh, while some are able to do that, others are not. And so the love addict, or if you want, the limerent, once he has conquered someone else, once he has courted and conquered someone else, and their love is returned, absolutely returned, well, then there's no more certainty, no more uncertainty. There's no more doubt. There's no more reason to hope and to ruminate. You've got the person there, and they're not as appealing. And so the love addict or the limerent is going to go on to the next person so they can reenact the drama again.
I've done that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
In my case, I have not to insert a spoiler, but in my case, I have to say that increasing age. I'm 61 now. Increasing age and circumstances have really helped my my extra, maybe even superficial external situations, but also maybe the inner maturity have really helped. So I'm okay with, actually now I'm okay with being single, even as recent as, well, as 25 years ago. I still had the certain aspirations without having enough self-knowledge to know what I was doing, what was really going on. And I naively thought, well, I could date someone, and we could be crazy about each other. And but the words dating and relationships are very innocuous, very harmless sounding words, and very clinical sounding words, and they don't begin to capture what can happen to the to a mind that is completely engulfed in its obsession. And that's where the headlines come from. You just open the Daily Mail, and it's full of headlines about people who have been pushed to extremes through their limerence. And I'd like to think that partly external situations and partly biological inside me and partly mental have spared me of that. And I don't know if it's what I would recommend for everyone, because not everyone wants to face up to living singly. There's a lot of people. I think I heard on the radio the other day, or on TV, there was a segment on loneliness, and how many adults, how increasingly baby boomers and Generation X people are spending more than 8 hours a day alone, and how horrible, and how what do we need to do as a society? But for me, as an introvert, that's the ideal. I want more time alone.
Yeah. Yeah. that word engulf really stood out for me there. And you know, like I'm drawing two circles on my pad, right? One inside another, two concentric circles. And on the engulf phase is I'm writing the word addiction in the outer circle, okay, and then in the inner circle inside that, I'm writing me or us, you know, like it, and that's the feeling of being engulfed by addiction. Now I'm doing this. I'm doing the same again. I'm doing the same circles underneath, and I'm writing me in the outer circle, the bigger circle, and I'm writing addiction in the smaller circle.
Yes.
And I'm thinking back to that high risk book by Ben
Timberlake
or whatever it was. Yeah, I can't actually see his full name on the audio book, right? So I'm not. It might be Tim something else, but that's the insight piece. You know, when we are bigger than our addiction, and I'm gonna go a step further, because this for me is the same thing, or the same but different, and it's when we are bigger than our trauma. So we have our trauma rather than the trauma having us.
Yes.
And then a side of where this came from, it's a little bit weird. It's a little bit weird one, but hopefully I'll explain it in a different way. So my wife's uncle died this year, and it was a terrible time for all of us, especially for my wife, because she was close to the guy, and he also had one of her kidneys, so he needed a new kidney, and she donated a kidney to him, and he didn't have the years out of his new kidney that my wife wanted, you know. So he had a butcher shop in Scotland, and he took it over from his father, and then his daughter and son-in-law took it over from him. But he used to say, "I don't own my shop owns me," or "the shop owns me." And it's this idea that he was engulfed by his shop. Ben was engulfed by his addiction. I was engulfed by my trauma until I saw it was the other way around. Until Ben saw that. He was bigger than his addiction. Until I saw that I was bigger than my primal wound or my trauma. And it sounds, you know, before we spoke, you talked of a limerence experience that only lasted a fortnight. So
yes, that's right.
So something happened within you. So what happened? Can you explain that? Can you explain what happened, or the insight, or what changed, or something happened? Because I'm guessing that limerence episodes have been longer than that in the past.
Oh yes, yes, yes.
So
Yes, they have been longer in the past. In fact, I'm in the wake of that episode. I made a list of how many Limerence episodes I've had in my whole life. I'm 61 now, and I've had about 65
wow,
episodes. 65 episodes in my whole life. The first one was when I was 3 years old in nursery school. I had a really, really deep crush on a boy next to me in the crib next to me who was always sick. And I, after I made the list of all the names, all 67 names, uh, between the ages of 3 and 61, I put from on a scale from 1 to 10, I put the intensity of all of those episodes, and there were at least 5 or 6 episodes that would have been a 10. They were actually a 10. And the least painful and the most mild was a 1 or maybe a 2. And the one of the episodes that was a 10 was what originally drove me into therapy when I was 25, 26 years old. That episode was what drove me into therapy. In this particular case, now it's one of the characteristics. Looking at the literature, one of the characteristics, or a couple of the characteristics, is that, and I think we know this from pop culture, we know this from literature, we know this from the arts, from our own lives. It comes very suddenly. You don't, when you least expect it, it can happen. That moment, and it's called a glimmer in the literature. I don't know if in the original book, but in the websites that talk about this, they call it a glimmer that happens between you and someone else. And then um, it's it's completely unexpected. It's completely unexpected. And then once the glimmer starts, it's completely involuntary. You can't turn it off. You can't just say to yourself, like a soldier, okay, I'm going to soldier through this, and then that's how it is. Uh, there's also a euphoria. There's a very it's like this has been well documented, the different stages. There's a phase in the beginning which you could call the honeymoon phase, and it's like euphoria. And I actually did feel it for after I volunteer at a soup kitchen, and I met an actor, and we handed out food together, and we talked, and he was a Hollywood actor, not a star at all, but a Hollywood actor. At least from my point of view, he was an actor, and he was very, very handsome. And as soon as I got home, and I was addicted to watching all the movies that he's been in, and that's how I fell in love. But more than that, it was Instagram. It's a very slippery slope. If you're a limerent, to linger on Instagram in that lovesick way, that's really fatal. And so I went through a period of maybe 72 hours, and I didn't totally realize what was happening to me. I thought this person was like the best thing since sliced bread. Even though I didn't, even though he's not gay, and we probably would not even see each other again, it was not rational. It was not rational. It was that euphoric stage of the whole world actually appeared different. I could walk out of my apartment and look at the foliage and the vegetation around me, and it was like I was looking at a different world. But that was just that immediate euphoric phase. And in my case, this is not someone I was ever going to see again. And after I went through the euphoric phase of maybe 3 days, I came down from that high, from that, like the crest of the wave, down into the valley. And I realized that I was waking up and thinking about the person, and the thoughts were intrusive. I was ruminating, and the whole world seemed to, it was like a total eclipse. The whole world seemed like it was insipid, uninteresting. I lost interest in my everyday hobbies. I lost interest in everyday life. I really went into that valley. And I, being a rational person, I knew, And having read some of the literature, not just limerence literature, but the literature on dating and breakups and getting over people, I knew that it was a really good idea to what do you call that when you decide not to look at someone's Instagram? The best way is to unfriend them. And if you're not a friend to begin with, which you don't need to be on Instagram, you block them. That's and people all over the limerence websites and support groups are talking about how they have to do that. Of course, if you're a good addict, then you realize, okay, I've blocked them, but I haven't blocked their sister yet. So let me look at the sister's Instagram. Let me look at the other sister's Instagram. Let me look at the dad's and the mom's Instagram. And so after maybe 4 days, I blocked everybody. I was rational enough to know, because this was let's say, a fairly mild case of limerence. This was on a scale from 1 to 10. This was maybe a 4, which for me was a big deal because it hadn't been an issue in so many years, but it still felt like a big deal. Yeah. And the rational person in me knew that as soon as because they have an expression in Spanish, ojos que no ven, corazón que no siente. Eyes that don't see, heart that doesn't feel. There's something very powerful about photographs, especially of a shirtless, very handsome person playing soccer and basketball. So as soon as I shut that off, I began the recovery. And I actually blogged about it a little bit. I never had any sexual fantasies about the person. I looked at porn to avoid having any sexual fantasies. So I took the steps, and to this day, I've never had any sexual fantasies about the person. In fact, I've forgotten what they look like. I've totally forgotten what they look like, except they were Jewish and suburban and very handsome. And so that began the process, and I could actually measure it day by day how I was improving. And then like a lot of things, it starts to get better, and then you go down again, and so before you're up to full recovery, you've slipped many times, but not because you've looked at pictures, just because the mind is so capable of the rumination and the intrusive thinking. That is a big deal. But this was a fairly light case. And of course, I did call my therapist. I still have one. He lives 3,000 miles away, so we only do phone sessions. I did call him, hoping that we could have an impromptu session, and he was not available. So I didn't get a chance to talk to him, and I just dealt with it myself. This was a light case. It didn't involve even touching or kissing or going out for dinner with someone or any of that uncertainty or any of that hope that really keeps limerence alive.
Yeah. Wow. Fascinating. There's kind of like two ways of this, and there's the white knuckling and there's the insight. I'm a combination of those two. So the story from my own life that rings true for this is me giving up smoking on the back of a huge insight, on the back of my mother-in-law's diagnosis with terminal cancer. And that the insight happening to me, I don't want my wife to, I don't want to see my wife's reaction to my diagnosis, reacting to my diagnosis of cancer in the same way that she reacted to her mother's.
Yes.
And then 15 and then it's a slightly longer story than that, but then I had the strategy. So I went to the pharmacy and I got the nicotine puffer thing, a little plastic thing that you put in your mouth. So it's got the nicotine. So it's got something I felt I needed to have something to do with my hands rather than just the nicotine patches. You see, so that's that you're addicted to the holding the cigarette
Yes.
as well as the nicotine in the cigarette. And so the two things combined, and it's 10.5 years now since I gave up smoking, approximately. And yeah, so it was the insight and the strategy, but the insight did the hard work for me in this case.
Yes.
So,
Yes, I see. And how did the insight come in a moment, in a flash, in a moment, and
yes,
in certain words?
I saw my wife on the phone to her brother. I saw her collapse on the floor with the. Sorry, excuse me. I saw her collapse on the floor when she heard the diagnosis, and I thought, I can't cause that. I can't. I couldn't. I can't cause that for her.
Yes.
And that did the heavy lifting.
Yes.
But we live in a world where it's all about the strategies and tactics and hacks and with cigarette stopping smoking, it's with drugs. So that's the cultural model.
Yes.
But the cultural model doesn't work. If it did work, then no people that want to give up smoking would fall off the wagon and smoke again.
Yes. May I interject that when you were talking about insight, I think there's a lot of insight to be discovered in dreams. Now, I did a lot of psychoanalytic psychotherapy for 8 years in Barcelona. Um, I even read quite a bit of Freud, his whole interpretation of dreams, and I was in a phase where I would catch everybody's Freudian slips, and so I'm not quite as steeped in that stuff now, but I am aware. You see, you're talking about insights, and when I talked about Tanya and her passing and my insight, that I really turned a corner with that insight. And in my grief over Tanya's passing, I really turned a corner. I can see it like a flash. In this particular case of limerence, I can't point to any specific insight that I've had, but I can say that my dreams were very, very vivid and very disturbing. And even on a few occasions, I wrote them down. And even if I didn't take the trouble to interpret the dreams, I know that my brain, through the dreaming process, through the unconscious process, was working through this episode for me and with me.
Wow.
Yes.
So I just want to make it clear, listeners. Obviously, we're not shrinks advocating any particular approach here. We're just two new friends chatting about stuff and sharing experience. Yeah. Wow. I'm conscious of time, Alex. Is there?
Yes.
As always, listeners, check out the show notes. Alex has got some books as link to the books and his socials on there in the show notes. So check out what he's doing. Is there something that I've not asked you that you'd like to share? Have you got any final thoughts you'd like to finish off with? What else would be good for you?
I think we've mentioned therapy. No matter what you may feel about it, it may not be for everybody, but 12-step work. I've done 12-step work. I've done group therapy. I've done individual therapy. It's helped me a lot. Uh, but I don't want to be advocating for any specific kind, obviously. Creative writing, I am a writer, but even if you're not a creative writer, all the journaling that you can do is always going to be helpful. And even if you don't keep it, you can write it. You can write 10 pages and just compulsively and then burn it. And in my particular case, getting back to the topic of adoption, I did meet my birth parents. I know I don't know the statistics about what percentage of people nowadays end up meeting their birth parents, but for me, that was really, really healing. Even though my birth mother and I never really got along, I had a very, very good relationship with my birth father. And for me, that was a big part. And I don't want to advocate it as a universal, because not everyone is in a position where they can do that. And finally, also perhaps a little controversially, for me, spirituality and religion have helped. You know, even the way the light version of that, which is found in the Alcoholics Anonymous book, nothing in God's world happens by chance. The limerent episode that I went through recently, I would like to think, and I do think, is not a coincidence. It was not a chance. It was put there as a lesson for me to learn.
Yeah. Wow. And it's been a fantastic new topic to explore.
Yes.
For this, so before we started the recording today, listeners, I was saying I had some ideas about, asking Alex if he had any ideas about what the theme would be. I said I'd had some jumping off points. I have to say, your theme, limerence, was probably about 100 times stronger than my idea, my kicking off point. I think it's really brought some clarity in my mind and heart about this stuff, and especially that word engulf. When you
Yes.
so trauma threatened to engulf me.
Yes.
And when I realized that I wasn't my trauma, that was the key insight.
Yes.
For me. And the other thing about insights, I often say this: we can't actually give them to other people.
Interesting.
They have to have them themselves.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. You can't just take a volume from the library, take down a book and open a page and see all those brilliant insights. It has to be something that's grown inside you organically.
Yeah. Yeah. I grown, and I would say, yeah, hatched. It's like hatching a new idea, isn't it? It's like hatching.
Yes.
Yeah. And if we were going to the spiritual world, we could say, like it's a rebirth, isn't it? Like a rebirth.
That's very true.
Yeah. Wow.
A renaissance. Renaissance is another way of saying rebirth.
It is, of course. Isn't that?
Yeah. Yeah, he's undergoing a renaissance.
Yeah, I did French for like 8 years, and how many times have I heard that word renaissance? Loads, millions of times, and I've never actually thought what it means. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, hey, that's that would be a good name for a book, wouldn't it? The Renascent Adoptee.
Yes, indeed. Or an anthology.
Sorry?
Or an anthology that you have to edit.
Yeah.
It's a good idea. I'll contribute if you let me.
Yeah. I've got you're a writer. I kind of started writing my book 4 times a couple of years ago. I got to about 10,000 words each time. 10,000, 12,000, 15,000. And I figured I actually prefer talking to writing.
Yes, that may well be. Yes.
Yeah, but you mentioned that you're an introvert. I'm perhaps a little bit more extrovert. Maybe that's why I do it. But I also feel that my words are not yet clear enough I'm almost like I'm working on my communication. I'm working on my words. I'm working on my metaphors. I'm working on my stories. I'm working on my insights, so that when it comes to it, they'll land better when they're written. That's where I'm at.
I see. You're in a sort of gestation period now.
Yeah, and I've been in it for like 2 years. And I hope, you know, the other thing is that we're creating the audience with the podcast, because
yes,
as you know, as we discussed last time, you know, like writing the book is one thing, but getting it out there is another, and that's one of the reasons I'm delighted to be able to help you and get your word out, and that's why I'm urging you listeners to check out what Alex is doing. But been a beautiful conversation, and just that 2 months since we spoke, and this emergence of this limerence topic as a fascinating area to discuss was definitely a blessing.
Yes, indeed, I agree.
Thank you very much, listeners, and we will speak to you again very soon. Goodbye.